Straight ahead, expanded field. Two Democrats have now entered the primary for U.S. Senate in Texas, joining the two Republicans in their own contest. We speak with the Democrats, former Congressman Colin Allred and retired astronaut and Air Force pilot Colonel Terry Virts, about why they think they should win the primary. And there's a new theme emerging among the Democrats. Political dominoes will look at a key statewide race that's wide open next year, Texas Attorney General, now that Ken Paxton is running for U.S. Senate. And done deal, the House and Senate passed what President Trump calls his, quote, one big beautiful bill. We'll speak to a North Texas Republican congressman who was among those who held up the vote for hours about his concerns with the bill, and hear from Democrats who call it ugly. Good morning, I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics starts now. Hello and welcome to Eye on Politics. Hope you're having a great July 4th holiday weekend. The race for U.S. Senate in Texas is accelerating. Two Democrats in the past 2 weeks have launched their campaigns for the March 2026 primary. They include former Dallas Congressman Colin Allred, who jumped in on July 1st. Last year, Allred was the Democratic nominee and ran against Republican Ted Cruz and lost by 8.5 percentage points. Allred joined retired NASA astronaut and Air Force F-16 fighter pilot Terry Virts, who kicked off his own campaign 1 week earlier. Colonel Virts released his own campaign video calling himself a, quote, common sense Democrat, and says he's not a traditional Democratic candidate. Three others who are well known in Texas are considering entering the Senate race: former Congressman Beto O'Rourke of El Paso, Congressman Joaquin Castro of San Antonio, and State Representative James Tallarico of Austin. The winner of the Democratic primary will take on the Republican nominee, who at this point will either be incumbent Senator John Cornyn, who's seeking his 5th term, or Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who's leading in early Republican Party primary polls. We spoke with Allred on Thursday about his now 2nd consecutive run for U.S. Senate. In his campaign video, he said he's not giving up. I asked him why Democratic primary voters should select him over Terry Virts and the others who may run, and why he's trying again.
Just like a lot of folks, I spent the last 6 or 7 months with my family, watching what's happening, watching some of the promises that were made in the last election about being focused on lowering costs for working families, being on their side, and watching those promises be broken. And I just feel like everything is kind of backwards, and people are working harder for less, but they're also seeing people who are cutting corners or who are making deals, getting ahead. And I just think there's a sense that I get from folks that this is just not how it's supposed to be. And it doesn't have to be this way. I know that Washington's broken. I know that our system is rigged. I know what we need to do to unrig it. And you're right, Jack, I have always been a fighter. I only got here by overcoming incredible odds, being raised by a single mom, going to Baylor, being undrafted in the NFL. Every single time I've tried to do something, it's been difficult. I expect this will be the same.
Why should Democratic voters select you over the others? And how are you going to excite grassroots Democrats?
Well, listen, these are all friends of mine and folks who I think have a lot of talent. I think it's a reflection of how much talent we have in our state. And we've been in constant communication. I'm running for one reason, and that's to make sure the Texans know that I'm going to be on their side. I'm going to fight for them to lower their costs, to stop corrupt politicians, quite honestly, like Ken Paxton and John Cornyn from rigging the economy. Against working Texans. I'm going to get out there and spend as much time as I possibly can talking to ordinary Texans, talking to hardworking folks, going to work sites, having longer conversations where we can talk about what we should do to try and make it so that folks can get ahead. And I'm going to spend as much time as I possibly can talking, listening, having events. I'm excited about it. I'm not in Congress anymore. We have the ability to do some more things than we could in the previous election, and it's going to be really fun.
When I spoke with Virts, he said, you can't win. And I know he's probably supposed to say that, but he says a fresh face can win. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to respond.
Well, everybody's entitled to their opinion. And listen, I'm not taking anything for granted. I don't expect anyone to support me based on the last election or anything like that. I want to earn folks' votes in this election about what I'll do going forward. Jack, I think you know me well enough to know that I am humble enough to understand that there's some things that we absolutely have to do differently from the last election, but also that I think most Texans are sitting there hoping that somebody's going to talk about what's going on in their lives, and will have plans to try and help them get ahead. And that's what I think they're going to make their decision based on.
From the sounds of it, if you were in Congress, you would be voting against what President Trump and Republicans call the one big beautiful bill. And I'm wondering, as far as I know, there are cuts to the growth of Medicaid, but they're also extending the 2017 tax cuts for everybody. And also, there would be what's in the bill is grants for states like Texas to get reimbursed for its border security efforts. So, talk to me about that.
Well, listen, this is why I think there was an opportunity that they had here to maybe put together a bill that could have gotten bipartisan support. And I certainly want to lower taxes on the middle class and on working class Texans, and that's something I would support. But instead it took a different route, one where in order to pay for some of the tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, they're kicking 1 million Texans off their health care. We already have the highest uninsured rate in the country. And even if you are insured, this is going to impact you by driving up our costs and continue to hurt our rural healthcare system that's already under so much strain. They were going to raise energy costs just for basically the purpose of saying that they don't want to support renewable energy, but it's going to end up costing you $800 more a year. We're the number one renewable energy state in the country. We're number one in wind, number two in solar. This is a big deal for us.
Verts hasn't run for office before, and I asked him why voters should select him over Democrats who've previously been elected.
I've been watching the country for the last few years, very frustrated with what's going on, really frustrated with both parties. And I came to the decision that I can't just sit around and doom scroll on Twitter and complain to my friends. It was time for me to do something. I was a F-16 fighter pilot in the Air Force. I was a NASA astronaut, and I feel like I've been given a lot. To those whom much has been given, much will be expected. So I looked at, where I could make the most impact, where I could do the most good. And to me, it was running as a Democrat here in Texas for the Senate, because it looks like for John Cornyn's seat, but it looks like Ken Paxton's going to be the nominee, corrupt Ken Paxton.
It's difficult to run for any candidate to run statewide, but even more so for Democrats in Texas who haven't won in 3 decades. So, how are you going to break through?
What we need to do is not do the same thing over, hoping for a different result. And, we had Colin Allred, who ran the last time. He just recently announced that he's going to run again. Good man. I love Colin. I supported him. I voted for him. I wish he was our senator, but he's not. And Texas has for the last century, if you lose a Senate race, you don't win again. And if the Democrats try and do the same thing again, I don't think we're going to win. Texans just don't vote for a traditional Democratic politician, which is why I'm doing it. That's not what I am. I'm a fighter pilot, NASA astronaut, not that, which doesn't make me special. It makes me thankful for the opportunities I had in public school. But my worldview is to solve problems and not just be on, the D side fighting against ours, or the typical politician. And I think that's what Texans want. Somebody who's going to fight for Texans and not for their DC party, you know, in Washington.
Why do you think that Democratic primary voters should vote for you over Colin Allred, who you mentioned obviously is now in this race, and then the other Democrats who may get in?
I'm sure there'll be more folks that join the race. My background in the military is to solve the problem. I was on the space station, we had a really bad ammonia leak alarm. I didn't worry that some of my crewmates were Russians, and I didn't care about their background. We just need to solve the problem. And that's going to be how I approach being the senator from Texas. I'm going to serve Texans, and I'm not going to work for the senator from New York. Um, Colin Allred, again, good man. I voted for him. He is Chuck Schumer's candidate. So if Democrats think that we can run Chuck Schumer's candidate and win in Texas, it's been 30 years. That's not going to happen. And it's really important right now because we have this big, beautiful bill. It's horrific. 1.4 million Texans are going to lose their health insurance. Texas, thanks to our one party GOP rule, we already have the most number of uninsured people of any state, and we're about to add 1.4 million to that roster. That's important to me. I have family members who have used Medicaid recently. It's an important thing. Texans are going to lose that. And unless we can win in the Senate, unless we can get a majority, there is no fighting back. We just sit there and let all of these disasters that are happening, losing healthcare, having masked men run through the streets of Texas, yanking construction workers and farm workers off the street, throwing them in plain cars. That's not American. That's not Texan. And unless we can win as a Democratic Party with a common sense guy like myself, if we try and do the same thing over and over again, we're going to lose again.
One emerging campaign theme both Wirtz and Allred are discussing is political corruption. A Texas Politics Project at UT Austin poll out last month shows that political corruption and leadership is the #1 concern by Texans. Overall, 17% said that's the biggest problem facing the state, which is more than inflation and prices and immigration and border security. When it comes to Democrats, 31% said this is the #1 issue. We spoke with the Texas Politics Project Research Director, Dr. Joshua Blank, about this and how the Democratic candidates are trying to tap into this concern by residents.
When you look at those numbers, it's really being driven by Democrats. And Democrats, both when we ask them what's the most important problem facing the country and what's the most important problem facing the state in the University of Texas Politics Project polling that we do regularly, normally Democrats are split across a range of issues, with no issue really, I would say, jumping up above any other, but usually 6 or 7 issues, each at about, 5 to 10%, climate change, gun control, education, abortion policy, and so on and so forth. With Donald Trump entering office, what you see is the Democrats have essentially all been focused on Donald Trump. And one of the things that I think, is sort of maybe underappreciated here is that even though we've just had a Texas legislative session in which Texas government has been front and center, the president inserted himself into that session repeatedly. He endorsed both the lieutenant governor and the speaker of the House during the sessions for their next election. He got involved in the voucher debate. He's called for the legislature to come back and redistrict. And so ultimately, the closeness with which Texas Republican officials are, cultivating with the president for their own voters is actually turning off a lot of Democratic voters here in the state. And again, there's really nothing that unifies Democratic voters like Donald Trump.
The race for Texas Attorney General is intensifying. This will be an open seat for the first time in more than a decade because Republican Ken Paxton is running for U.S. Senate. 3 Republicans have entered the race so far. They include State Senator Mays Middleton of Galveston, who's pledged to spend $10 million of his own money. Another state senator, Joan Huffman of Houston, who's a former criminal court judge, is also in the race, and Aaron Reitz, who worked briefly in the Trump administration and who's also worked for Paxton as well. In the Democratic primary for Attorney General, reports indicate State Senator Nathan Johnson of Dallas and former Galveston Mayor Joe Jaworski, a candidate 4 years ago, may run. Republicans in Congress passed what President Trump calls his one big beautiful bill. So why did some of them, including a North Texas congressman, delay the vote? The answer when Eye on Politics returns. Welcome back to Eye on Politics. President Trump and Republicans in Congress are celebrating this holiday weekend after both the House and Senate passed what they call their, quote, one big beautiful bill. The president signed it at the White House. All Texas Republicans voted for it. The bill includes $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, which extends and makes permanent the existing tax rates and brackets. New provisions include no tax on tips and overtime, which are capped and temporary. There's also a $930 billion cut over a decade to the growth of Medicaid. The Congressional Budget Office, or CBO, estimates nearly 12 million recipients will lose Medicaid coverage by 2034 because of new work requirements. The bill also spends $350 billion for border security and national security. The legislation includes $13.5 billion so states like Texas can be reimbursed for their border security efforts. The CBO estimates deficits will rise by nearly $3.3 trillion over the next 10 years, but Republicans dispute that. I spoke with Congressman Keith Self of McKinney, who was among the Republicans who held up the vote for hours because of his concerns. I asked him about that Thursday, right after he voted for the bill.
I did because, look, There was the option of trying to send it back to the Senate. We went through every permutation with the Senate, looking at every single senator to see if there was any change. There was no option. So we went outside to find ways, because there's plenty of ways to save money and improve policy throughout the federal government. So last night we sent a list of requests to the White House, to the administration. And about 1 o'clock last night, we started the negotiations. 2 o'clock, they were done. I changed my vote from no to yes on the rule, and which freed up the bill to come to the floor. And today I voted yes, because we had to find some way to improve the fiscal situation and hopefully policy, but that's why. There was simply no way to get it back through the Senate.
I was just going to ask you about that, because you were really one of only a handful of holdouts that kept the vote from taking place until early this morning, as you said. And my understanding is there are no changes to this bill. So did you win any concessions for the future?
Well, I'm not going to call them concessions. We made significant commitments, and some are in the fiscal area, some are in the policy area. Some of them we can talk about soon, some we cannot. But we got, particularly in the fiscal arena, we got a couple of major issues that I think will eventually pay off to reduce our fiscal problems that we have in this nation.
Is there anything that you can share with us now?
The big one I cannot, and I wish I could.
With regards to cuts to Medicaid, I was reading that nearly 12 million people may lose their coverage, according to the Congressional Budget Office. What do you say to that? And is part of this the fact that the work requirements are higher now?
This is one of the major cuts that we did achieve in the House bill and working with the entire House Republican conference. $1 trillion out of Medicaid. Now, let's talk about those cuts and what they mean. Let's talk about illegals, and let's talk about able-bodied adults. So the illegals are supposed to come off of Medicaid, but there is also no teeth to the Senate bill. There was teeth in the House bill, but there's no teeth in the Senate bill to force that to happen. On the able-bodied adults, this is a COVID provision that still lingers today. You can cash your government check, play your video games. You should be in the economy working, contributing to the economy.
Do you think that Democrats are going to actually make some gains because of this bill? I understand that you and other Republicans are quite pleased, the president, but Democrats, on the other hand, are not, and they think that they have an opportunity here in next year's elections.
Well, frankly, now that the border is not nearly as much of an issue, the economy will be the issue, I believe. It normally is on most elections. So the results of this big, beautiful bill, if it happens fast, remember that's the mistake they made in 2017. They didn't pass it till December. There was not enough time to impact the midterm elections. This time we've passed it to the president's desk by 4 July, 6 months earlier. So now we hope that the impact of the big, beautiful bill in every aspect has more time to take effect, and people will be feeling better about themselves, their pocketbook, their jobs, and generally America as a whole.
Democrats on Capitol Hill call the legislation, quote, one ugly bill. Members of Congress from North Texas and around the state held a virtual news conference last week.
The reason that we're fighting against this isn't because it's been proposed by Republicans, but because it's going to bring harm not only to our constituents, but frankly, a lot of that harm is going to be directly directed to their own constituents.
Republicans are putting the needs of Trump in front of their own constituents. And this is going to be something that I believe that we're going to have to dig ourselves from underneath for a long time to come.
Up next, a judge blocks a part of President Trump's executive order clamping down on access to asylum at the southern border. More on that when Eye on Politics comes right back. A federal judge blocked President Trump's executive order to limit access to asylum at the southern border. Sarah Jenkins with this week's brief.
On his first day back in office, President Trump signed an order suspending the U.S. asylum law, accusing migrants of staging an invasion at the southern border. That order reinstated the so-called Remain in Mexico policy, which requires migrants to wait for their asylum hearings on the Mexican side of the border. The judge said that proclamation was unlawful. The plaintiffs, asylum seekers, and immigrants' rights groups asked the judge for class action status for the lawsuit, which means a single judgment affects all members of a defined class. The judge granted that request and gave the Trump administration 2 weeks to file an appeal. For The Brief, I'm Sarah Jenkins.
Thank you, Sarah. And don't forget, you can watch all our full interviews from today's show on our CBS Texas YouTube page. Once you're there, hit the subscribe button. And that's all for Eye on Politics. I'm Jack Fink. I am listening, and we are listening to you at CBS News Texas. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next week. And from all of us, enjoy the rest of your holiday weekend.